the jiu-jitsu was and is, like all arts, always evolving, adapting, and developing. Where some martial arts are so into conserving their tradition, their style, that they become dead, and they no longer evolve. Hixon was in Japan at the time, fighting in Pride, which was, in my opinion, arguably better rules and a much more, like, I love how the Japanese, at least back then, would view martial arts the way we in the West watch a golf. You're quiet and you're respecting it as art. Whereas the American fan, the European fan, is, you have guys who've never fought in their life jumping up and down, I'd kick his ass, so he should be punching him right there. Like, they're just, ugh. Well, like, I remember there was a period of time shortly before I found Horian's Garage, where I was boxing and I was getting pretty good. I was in that stage, what I call the advanced amateur, the purple belt phase, where in some ways I'm really good, and in some ways I'm not as good as I think. And I was at an LA gym, and I sparred a pro from Mexico, and the third round, he just about took my head off, and I realized the mercy that he had done with me in rounds 1 and 2. And it was one of those things where it just clicked, where not only am I not as good as I think I am, but I am pretty good, but I'm good enough to read that this guy is holding back. He's a pro, and I'm not a pro boxer. And I realized that I don't want to learn this because it'll be hard. It's something that, like, again, I love the art of boxing, but it doesn't love me back. And I remember I got hit in that sparring session so hard that I remember for a week I was having a hard time reading. My eyes would, like, jump from the lines in the book, and I just thought, this is dumb. Here's some of my art right there behind me.
Yeah, it looks good. So you mentioned when you showed me the art out in your garage that you weren't finishing projects historically. Now that one looks like it's completed. Was that done in the last few years?
This piece, God, I want to say not producing a lot of art in the last 5 or 6 years. My art production has slowed down, and it's not intentionally slowed down. It just kind of did. Kids, everything in life. To be quite honest, one of the biggest shifts, and I don't want to sound like a guy who is a know-it-all or has a crystal ball, but let's go back. 2017, I'm in an animation class at LA City College, and great class. I'm with all these young people. I'm the oldest dude in the class, and the instructor himself was in his early 40s. He'd worked for Pixar, Disney, all these things, and it's an animation class. And I'm expecting that we are going to learn this animation program in Adobe. So I'm excited. And by about the second week, we're still going over story building, narrative, character building, all that. So after class, I go up and I'm like, oh, when are we going to start using the animation program? I'm here to learn how to actually do the coding that you got to do, how to animate. And he said, we'll get there, but I'll tell you what, within 5 years, everything that I'm supposed to teach in this class will become obsolete. But story building and character won't. And I'm like, really? And he's like, yes, AI is coming and it is going to render things that took hours to make the hand turn like this will be done with your phone just by picking up you. And sure enough, that's where we're at. So that really pulled me out of art inspiration and other things. It was kind of a combination of a bunch of things like, fuck, am I going to really learn this entire program only for it to become obsolete? I remember thinking, and I'll be quiet, it's like going to a VCR repair class. It's who no one's going to be fixing them anymore. Yeah.
So he had that to share with you folks in 2017, you said?
He told me only, yeah, after class. And I dropped that class. And he basically said, which is true, is everything you need to know, you could learn on YouTube. Yeah, and it's true. I mean, there are all kinds of classes that instruct you on the 3 or 4 major programs out there on YouTube. And I made animations, but every time I was making these, I was like, God, the AI revolution is going to render this obsolete. And so here we are.
Okay, so what you're sharing, Chris, I read the book The Wolf of Wall Street, 2013. I read it. And, you know, I write books and I've been writing my whole life. I was the one thing I could do well in school. I think you said art was one of your main gifts as a student, as a kid. But one of my gifts was writing. And I think my first thing I wrote was a 10-page thing at age 7 on Michelangelo. And he fascinated me. And you might like him because he's probably your build, I would guess. He's very strong. And the reason he was picked, one of the main reasons he was picked to do the Sistine Chapel is because you got to be upside down. You're in your guard. I think that it was a 4-year project. And you know how hard it is to keep your arms up.
Yeah.
One of the skills I think Rickson Gracie, I know he jumps to the guard and he's on his back with Shamrock and these other big galoots. I think it's really hard to do what he does, which is constantly finding a clinch and a block and a clinch and a block. And you're doing that and it's very boring. And to be able to do that, it's boring for Ken Shamrock up on top as well, but he's bigger guy getting more exhausted. But that's the kind of guy I think Michelangelo was. He could do very difficult, repetitive things. And you're upside down with your arms up, you're breathing chemicals and paint thinners, and you have to climb the scaffolding. Have you been to the Sistine Chapel, Sifu, Chris?
Yeah, I've been to the area, but not inside. I didn't get to go inside.
It's incredibly high, so you're on scaffolding, so you got to climb up and down the scaffolding. I don't know how they handled their human waste and peeing and getting a sandwich and a drink, but it's quite a challenge. 4-year project, huge ceiling, and it's some of the most beautiful art. It's like what you could do with your talent on the thing behind you. Imagine doing that on some gigantic surface. I would imagine the Sistine Chapel is like the back wall of a high school gym. That's how big that area is. Maybe it's bigger. I don't know. And it's curved.
Yes, it's curved. It is I mean, clearly technology alters everything, including art. And what's really interesting when you do some deep dive art history, I want to say it was just before or the early part of the Renaissance was where they learned how to use mirrors and reflection to reflect. It's almost like cheating. It's like it's been called the Photoshop of the Renaissance, and it would reflect it. And a lot of the painters painted upside down because the reflection was upside down, and that was one of the ways how they found out how these artists were cheating using mirrors and projecting. Yes, projecting it. And I just found that fascinating because I mean, every artist cheats and every artist steals. And we take, especially when you really realize that when you're doing Photoshop montage art and pulling a piece from this and slightly altering that. And I remember part of me felt a little guilty. I'm like, it's too easy. These programs make it so easy to do what used to take so much more talent and years of experience. Now I can just touch a screen and push the pixels around. And so I don't know,
What I meant to add into the Michelangelo, the main reason he was chosen was because he was a sculptor. And sculpting, you can't make a mistake. If you do, you've got to start something over. If you're taking a piece of marble and you're doing your thing, I have to see it done. Maybe there are videos on YouTube of the sped up photography, time-lapse photography that show you how they do that. But I haven't watched somebody from start to finish, never lived with a sculptor. So imagine somebody who could do that. And he's also good at art and he's good at many other things as well. You know, to be an artist back in his day, you had to be a traveler. And I imagine today, to be like in film, you have to go to a place where New York or Chicago or Canada or LA, where they're Paris, these places where they're India, Bombay, they're doing all this film. You have to travel to get there. You have to be able to afford your stay. And in Michelangelo's time, they had to have these sponsors. So they had to play the political game to be, and sometimes they didn't want to play the political game, which was Martin Luther over in the Renaissance. He didn't play the political game and he had to run for his life, with horses and carts and by foot and hide out for a period of time until what do they call it? You were a police officer in Los Angeles. The heat is on until the heat is off.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that is the other thing. Like I often say, the art medium that I think I love more than anything is film. And that's, of course, the most expensive one, which requires a crew. I mean, you can make your own movie. Like one of the things I love, and I saw it on YouTube years back, is the guy that filmed, he made his entire movie, I think, on iPhone 5, which was, and it wasn't a bad film. I mean, it's like, wow, that impresses me.
I had a list of things that I was going to talk to you about, but I had a rough day yesterday and a little bit this morning, and some of the stuff you and I were going to discuss is somewhat dark. Is it possible that we could regroup next month and touch on that one?
Sure, absolutely.
And maybe today I can ask you about some things related to art and being a martial artist and doing the right thing and training and these types of things.
Ask away, Sifu, ask away.
Okay, so I watched some of the podcasts of Robert Drysdale, who's a deep diver on the history of martial arts and many other things. He speaks Portuguese. He's a big guy. He's got, a stern-looking face, which I don't, and maybe you're halfway in between me and Drysdale, and a little bit sterner, kind of rocky, solid-looking mug. And he grew up in Brazil. I don't know how rough a period he has. I don't know what his economic background, but to be in Brazil in the 90s and beyond, was probably not easy for an American dude. I think he's an American, right? He's lived in Brazil as an
Yeah,
American.
he's he's I mean, I'm pretty sure that what he told me he was dual citizen. I think his either his mother or father's Brazilian and the other one's American. And
Got it.
so yeah,
So he's doing these deep dives, and you've done deep dives on a number of things in your life. You've been in law enforcement, you've been in martial arts with probably 10,000 different people in all the gyms, or maybe 100,000, all the different gyms and seminars that you've been involved in. You're connected to Hixon, who's one of the people I look up to as a pure martial artist. He's not a perfect person, but he's a very pure martial artist who had really good intentions. And he didn't go for the money as maybe his brother did, or a couple of his brothers did, and cousins, and many other people in martial arts. Do you want to share anything about Hixon before I weigh in on Hixon?
Well, I feel blessed in the fact that for the last 5 or 6 years, with a break in COVID, I see Hixon about once every other month. So about 6 times a year, and get intensive training. And it has absolutely enhanced and revolutionized my jiu-jitsu. Now, having said that, I have other mentors and teachers as well throughout my career. My very first jiu-jitsu class was with Rickson Gracie. My second main coach was Hixon, but Haueter also instructed me, and Hixon was my fourth guy who I trained with, and then John Machado, and then Carlos Machado, and Jean-Jacques. And so like I often say that like, I mean, people nowadays go, "Oh my God, you trained with all those guys." Like, yeah, I did. But it's just because I was in the right place at the right time, and it worked out. And Hixon, one of the things I love about Hixon is ultimately always a student, and always trying to find how to make whatever we're working on more efficient. And he questions things. And so we're always running fine little motor movements through the laboratory of the jiu-jitsu. And so, yeah, what can I say other than that? I'm absolutely blessed that I have trained with the best and continually get to do so.
And evidently, for me, my time was Hixon. It's like you have the era of Hixon.
Yeah.
A lot of unbelievable fighters, but you're in the wrong decade. You have Hixon there, Could be you, but He was right there.
Right. You could have been you were number 2 under Hixon. You could have been number 1 under anybody else.
And the amazing thing, you feel like a chameleon. Mm-hmm. He can kind of make any game. You train with him, he can pretend to be you fighting me or anybody. It's amazing that aspect, especially in the teaching process.
What was so good about him?
He used to go to our school. We have 30 of the best guys, all higher belts. And he tells you, okay, choose how you want to start. And you choose, okay, he is not going to get out. He gets out, and he gets you in the position you ask him to start. With everyone, I think the best thing that he has on his game that on my view, and today understand that, was his defense. No way to get him. You let your mount take his back, do whatever you want. You can't get him.
He used to start, let guys take his back with a rear naked choke, fully locked in, black belts. Go ahead, start from here. And then he would defend,
get out, and get you there.
Yeah, crazy.
Then messes your mind up.
Yeah.
Like, hey, wait a minute.
Yeah.
How can he get out and he gets me here, can't get out,
Mm-hmm.
And I think the amazing thing was his confidence and belief on that. It makes amazing.
Well, he was unusual in that he was really into physical fitness as well, like yoga, really into yoga, become incredibly flexible and strong, and really into breathing. He had an amazing control of his body as well as the knowledge of jiu-jitsu.
Man, he brought a lot of elements to jiu-jitsu that I don't think people realize how important it was. Because people say, oh, I knew that. No, you did not. He brought in the breathing aspect, the gymnastica that makes you come closer to the nature habitat.
Yeah, gymnastica natural is what we're talking about. It's a style of who invented that? What was the man who invented that?
Orlando Cani.
And it was a Brazilian thing as well.
Brazilian guy, he's still alive in his 80s, and you look at him like, how can he do or still do that?
Really?
And the whole idea is move your body like the animals.
Right.
To bring back to us the animal instinct that we end up losing by the generation.
Yeah, I guess the first question I have for you, Sifu Chris, is you made a pretty substantial commitment to the combat arts and athletics as a young dude. So you're around people who many people consider masters of the things that they do. And I've had some masters who are good with swords, ground fighting, sambo, Chinese martial arts. I mean, I don't know how they were able to learn all of these things, you know, starting at age 10, whereas some people just do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and gymnastica. Is that the right way to pronounce it? Gymnastica?
Gymnastica natural.
Yeah.
Yes. So my model of the quintessential encyclopedia of martial arts in a human being is the Guru Badan Inosanto. Like, Badan is always humble, always learning. In his 80s, still learning and teaching. He's open-minded to all arts. I mean, like, I consider him to be the pinnacle of the encyclopedia of martial arts.
Yeah.
Hixon is like the master of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And I'm going to just call this, for lack of other words, old school way, oriented toward vale tudo or a street altercation. And like Jean-Jacques was the master of the sport grappling mode, and Hegan was the master of what was then happening was the pressure game. Like, Hegan developed the pressure game and taught that to a lot of guys who went on to win world championships, even though some of them don't give him credit, like Rafael or Lovato. Like, I remember seeing Lovato doing privates with Hegan almost every morning when he was a purple and a brown belt, learning the long step pass, the pressure pass, and the jiu-jitsu was and is, like all arts, always evolving, adapting, and developing. Where some martial arts are so into conserving their tradition, their style, that they become dead and they no longer evolve. But there's a value in that too, you know?
I'm going to click on a video of Horian talking about Teresópolis, the Gracie compound outside of Rio. Have you been to this compound?
I have not. I was going to go there when I was in Brazil once, and I can't remember that there was a logistical reason why we didn't go, but you know, that was 20 years ago, so I can't remember.
Because you and I, before we started recording today, we talked about being 15-year-old kids and having the freedom, the excitement, the discovery, the idea to test our limits, the idea that somebody else was perhaps paying our bills and making our sandwiches for us so we could do 8 to 10 hours of kid stuff all day and then be exhausted at night and kick back and watch Planet of the Apes or whatever movie we wanted to watch. And this is the story of the Gracies, who way back in probably the 60s built this compound outside of Rio. And they sometimes had over a few hundred people there for different events. So let's see if you can listen in and hear what Horian Gracie, I believe he's the eldest brother, talking about this compound and in his laboratory in his studio in Torrance, his dojo, a model of the home, and then there's some cutaways to the actual footage. So
it's a great model. I've seen that. I saw Horian about 2 years ago. Go ahead. Yeah.
Share with you some very special memories I had of this place. This is a summer house. the Gracie family compound, on a resort area called Teresópolis. It's about an hour from downtown Rio up in the mountains. Okay. The place had 21 bedrooms and 18 bathrooms. We had 18 uniformed employees that worked at the house. The employees alone had 14 children. So if there's nobody home, there's 32 people running around. Okay. We counted one time 37 children, all relatives from 6 months old to 17 years old. Now, to have 3 or 4 dozen of adults between relatives and guests that we often invite to spend time with us was not uncommon. So between the employees and their kids, the family children, and the family adults and friends, sometimes we have over 100 people staying on the compound. Absolutely unforgettable experience. There's a tank back there, but I remember swimming around with my brothers and cousins over there playing on that tank. The pool was never too deep, so the kids would not, have an accident or drown or anything like that. But it was a fun time in there. We had the employees' quarters, the horse stables, and a private bakery. There was a guy making bread all day long to feed everybody. All the meals were prepared according to the Gracie diet. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner were served 3 times each. One for the employees, one for the kids up to 17, and one for the adults. We had an in-house laundry service on this side of the building that, with industrial machines that washed 650 kimonos a week to provide for the academy in Rio. Twice a week, a pickup truck would bring up the dirty keys and take back clean ones. The kimonos are washed in here and then dried in lines back there. Now, they look like straight jackets. People would drive by, see the kimonos hanging, and then the kids sparring over here on the camels on the middle of the grass, 35 kids trying to choke each other. It looked like an insane asylum. Unbelievable experience. Twice we had carnival parties here for 1,200 guests with live band, music, food, and all that good stuff. And on Christmas, we always celebrate Christmas the night before. So my mother would decorate the house, and the kids would be having dinner. And after dinner, they'd be hanging out on the veranda here looking out into pitch dark. Then suddenly, Santa Claus would materialize, galloping towards the house on a black stallion this way, would park the horse on the grass, with a bag of toys on his back and the beer flying, park the horse, get off the horse, put the ladder, climb up into the living room, hand out the presents to the little kids, and then disappear into the night. Unforgettable. It was so significant to me that for the last 40 years, I've been dressing up as Santa Claus for my kids. Have to carry on the tradition, you know how it is.
It's good. That's a nice presentation.
So the idea of these parents back in the day, joining forces, taking their assets and buying a property and building the structures and, organizing, it takes some big planning to do all that stuff. And there's not everybody in the family, of course, would like each other or like everything about each other. You've got all these different personalities and egos. And, it wasn't an easy time in the 60s and 70s economically for all parties. So they put that together and they let the karma of that spot happen, and it produced incredible things. One of the stories I like the best that I've heard from the cousin from New York, who's very outspoken. What's his name? Basement Marcel Henzo. Yeah.
Henzo?
Yeah, fun, entertaining guy. He is probably the closest Gracie to some of the way that you do your comedy and your statements when you're doing your fun clinics. And from what I can see, maybe you would suggest somebody else, maybe a little more Hixon. But Henzo talked about, they're at the dinner table and he's 12 years old or something like that, and he's watching his dad and the dad's brothers and cousins, guys that are 20 some years, 30 years older than he do, have an argument while they're doing their appetizers at the dinner table. And they get up and they challenge each other and they go out and they roll around until somebody gives up. And then they come back to the table and they sit down and they finish the appetizer. Talk about not being stupid, like somebody in the modern era picking up a gun or going out to the cars and keying the other guy's cars or suing them for something stupid or talking dirt for the next 20 years. Just like lions and anyone who lives in a tribe, chimpanzees, bonobos, they settle their differences very quickly, and then they get back to eating and the camaraderie of the event. What are your thoughts, Sifu, Chris, on this kind of an event?
Well, I consider myself to be an amateur anthropologist, meaning I think from an anthropological lens, and I don't get paid for it, right? Which is interesting because sociologically, we humans call a professional as somebody who gets paid for doing whatever it is, a professional bricklayer, a professional chemist. And we almost dismiss the amateur as, you're amateurish, you aren't as skilled. And there are a lot of people with a lot of great skills who are not professionals. So let's clear that out of the way. So when I say I'm an amateur anthropologist, I'm not belittling anthropology or myself even. And it's kind of, I think it's a little bit my natural genetic makeup along with the way I was raised. I'm always looking at, like, I remember watching Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom when I was 7 or 8 with my dad, and he said, you can learn everything you need to know about humans by watching other animals. And I'm like, other animals? And it was like that moment where I realized, oh, humans are animals. And then, of course, later in college, from biology to parasitology to all that, I got really into the quote unquote health sciences. But through that, I was always more interested in biology and the sociological ramifications of it. God, how do I put it? So when I watch the way humans interact, I'm coming from a very, let's call it, I'm trying to get away from being so anthropocentric, which is so hard to do because I'm a human. And we tend to anthropomorphize everything. So like when you watch animation, we often use animals in the animation because I think we naturally are curious about ourselves and our relation to other animals. And that kind of brings forth a way of thinking that I think is a very healthy way of viewing the world. It right sizes me, it humbles me when I realize I am just an animal. And because I have language and guns, I am the most powerful animal on the planet. But I am very much still an animal with root basic drives and needs that are genetically in my grain. And one of those genetic things is the human propensity for fighting, for conflict. And Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu comes out of what I would call, at least in modern times, one of the more extreme honor cultures, where honor, especially within the male hierarchies, is something that you must defend or yield. There's no, it's a tough culture if you want to be tough. And growing up, maybe from my insecurities or whatever it was, I leaned into the martial arts world, which is an honor culture. And like, God, how do I put that?
Conflict resolution. You mentioned conflict, and then there's conflict, immediate conflict resolution with the bonobos, the baboons, the chimpanzees, the lions. They take care of their business and they get it out of the way, so they go back to being in a state of some sort of a homeostasis, a less violent state. We hope they can go right back into it, enjoy the next activity.
Yes. I guess what I'm trying to say, I'm trying to refrain from insulting that. Like, I find that, and I'm saying I'm part of this, I do this too, that I find it so low on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, so unenlightened. So, but then in the same way, we can't deny that that's not part of our nature. And it's almost like you got to go through it if you want out of it, or you can just avoid it and pretend that humans will never resolve conflict through violence. The fact is, humans resolve conflict with violence. And probably the least worrisome way would be through martial arts competition, whether it's two guys saying, let's take this to the mat room, or two guys saying, let's go outside the bar, we're going to piss off, you've insulted me, I need to defend my honor, let's solve the problem with fisticuffs. And obviously every culture goes through a period of time where it is very acceptable to have a duel. And a dueling is very much a part of martial arts culture. And I believe what happened was, in the traditional martial arts, the ones that no longer fought, no longer sparred, they lost that reality that you get from actually applying it in a real fight. So certain kung fu styles, certain Japanese karate styles and stuff had lost the necessary ingredient for them to be effective, which is you got to test it. And the combat sports, which I love, the combat sports, wrestling, boxing, judo, fencing, taekwondo, jiu-jitsu, Greco, I love them all, because all of them have become systems that preserve and fine-tune one area of unregulated hand-to-hand combat or a street fight. So each of them have an area of expertise. Clearly, boxing is the art of the hands and the head and not getting punched. By eliminating kicks, by eliminating grappling, by even breaking up the clinch, your only choice is to become really good at exchanging hands. So in essence, that combat sport preserves that aspect of the art. And each of these arts have a preservation effect for one of the ranges of a combat. And I often say, if I'm going to pick one art, there's only one I'm allowed to learn in the traditional way, it's going to be Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, original style, not the modern sport version, which I also love. I love that just as much.
Are you talking about the 1930s through 60s stuff that was around when Hixon was born?
I mean, I cannot say that I really know, because I haven't experienced it back then. And going back to what we were opening with, what has changed everything? Technology. The fact that you and I are communicating online over Zoom has changed the world.
Yeah.
So the Gutenberg press, was both positive and negative. It enabled humans to have much more complex warfare, as well as transferring positive knowledge around the world. And the telegraph made the American Civil War possible. Like back when you had to communicate by having a courier jump on a horse and ride 3 days from Washington to southern Alabama or wherever it was, like communication wasn't possible. And like I remember, I want to say it was around 2011 when the Arab Spring was happening, like 2011 through 2013, and the Maidan revolution in Ukraine and Russia. Suddenly this internet thing, this phone in our hands, Facebook, Twitter, enabled organization that we'd never seen yet. In other words, someone can put out a tweet, and then that person will reshare on Facebook, and in 6 hours, you can have 10,000 people protesting the corrupt Putin government, which scared the fuck out of Putin. And he watched it happen in Libya and saw what happens when the people rise up to change their autocratic government. So then, of course, the autocrats a few years later got a hold of the same thing. And then we're in an age of disinformation, misinformation, rapidly being communicated amongst us humans. So I'm far from our martial arts talk, but
let me jump back into solving differences. So one of the things that I am least enamored with about the modern era is this, because we have such a grasp and access to historical film, historical records, historical books. We have this GOAT, greatest of all times thing going on. So we have that over here. Then we have the 3 tennis greats who are incredible, who had really long careers. Federer's the oldest, Nadal second oldest, Djokovic, and then we've got Alcaraz and these huge number of 5 or 10 next people who could replace him. Very unlikely that any of them will have 20-year careers. It's kind of that wave that went into this thing.
Yeah.
McEnroe had like an incredible four-year career of excelling. And then he got into some other things. He's interested in art. He's a really good commentator. He wanted to be a father. I think he has 5 total kids. And so all these different shifts go on. And Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu that you were into as early as anyone almost in the United States came into being and then got really famous in the UFC. Rickson Gracie, big part of that. And even the referee, Big John McCarthy, I don't know if he was a black belt in the first UFC. Do you know about that?
No, he wasn't. But he later began, I want to say he began taking jiu-jitsu classes shortly after UFC 1 or 2. And then
I thought they knew about him to bring him in as the official because Horian was connected to him with one of the gyms that he ran and that he was a student. I thought that's how they knew about Big John.
Quite possible. I have no idea. In some ways, like the whole UFC thing and the history of it, you're going to get a different perspective of that history depending on who you're talking to.
Yeah.
And every one of these heroes, in somebody else's opinion, is the villain.
Yeah.
And in an equally valid opinion. And that is an area in which I often say, I'm not going to touch that area because not only would it just be me spewing another opinion, it kind of gets us into the whole postmodern thing of what is reality? What is objective knowledge? Because we're talking about an area that is so subjective. And so depending on your positioning, what your opinion is and who started what and who's responsible for what. And again, we're talking about heroes and villains and very blurred lines here.
Yeah. So let me step back and just say that there was so much of a fervor of all those challenge matches that happened in the late 70s and the 80s. And now the UFC comes around the beginning of the 90s. So people get to test all that stuff on a grand stage. Hixon's not part of that. And there were many reasons.
Well, he was. Yeah. Hixon was in Japan at the time, fighting in Pride, which was, in my opinion, arguably better rules and a much more, like, I love how the Japanese, at least back then, would view martial arts the way we in the West watch golf. You're quiet and you're respecting it as art. Mm-hmm. Whereas the American fan, the European fan, is, you have guys who've never fought in their life jumping up and down, I'd kick his ass, so he should be punching him right there. Like they're just the general UFC audience. And again, this is my subjective opinion. I find them at times repulsive. I prefer to watch martial arts the way someone should watch a golf, and not jump up and down as a fan and wanting one person to win. I like to watch the art. It's very often like people, my students and guys who I roll with, go, oh, did you see last week how Joe Schmo fought so-and-so and he kicked his ass and all this? And like, I never know the names, but when I watch UFC, I turn the volume off because I don't want to hear commenting and cheering. I don't want to hear what I call the pro wrestling part of it, the entertainment.
Yeah.
I'm there just to watch the martial art. And because I'm coming from a perspective of somebody who is a student of the arts, not a fan of the arts, if that makes sense.
I understand, and I'm with you on that. Part of what I write about in my book about raising child athletes, things you need to know, the title is Are You Raising a Child Athlete? Things you need to know, is about the idea of kids participating in athletics with more balance, with more joy in movement, with more recreation, with more learning the treatment of others in an honorable way, learning what it means to be an athlete, and enjoying watching their friends and their opponents do their thing as an art, not as this thing where you've got to be vicious and clobber the guy and put him out of the game and cheat. Like in my high school time, we had the opposing team. When I was a sophomore, and I traveled with the varsity team, and we went to an opposing team in the leading up to the state championship, and they watered in December. They watered the ground on a day where it wasn't frozen, and they put 1-inch cleats in all of their cleats. So our team showed up, and luckily one of the people who traveled with us, who was one of the fathers of the other kids, he knew about that, and he ordered a whole bunch of 1-inch cleats because he had seen that kind of stuff before. So this is just goes back to, like cheating in warfare. It is that close only counts in horseshoes and hand grenades. It's like there's no cheating in warfare. Anything goes. The definition of war is killing people and breaking things, and if you cheat to do that, that's no problem. Over to you for some comments.
Yeah,
I'll get back.
Yeah, that's one of those fascinating things where rules and regulations. And when I was a young Marine, I remember learning. One of our classes was on the Geneva Convention and the rules of warfare and what to do if you become a if you're captured,
a prisoner,
by yes, and what are they, how they are supposed to treat you, and how you are supposed to treat your enemy, the captives. And just being a young 18-year-old kid, I found it both frightening and fascinating that there are rules to war. Like, wow, this is really weird. Like, war is the ultimate team sport. And just in the way that current modern MMA is the ultimate individual combat sport, warfare truly is the ultimate team sport. And football, whether it's the NFL or Australian rules or rugby, these sports are metaphors of tribal warfare.
Yep.
And yeah, so it's one of those things that from a moral philosophical sense, this opens up the can of worms of all kinds of questions about, again, us humans as animals, as pack animals who fight with packs. And if we can outnumber that wolf pack over there, it's time to take it over and kill all the men and enslave the women and breed. And so suddenly history makes sense when you're viewing it from that lens. I often say that I like to pretend that I am like current politics, whether it's Israel, Hamas, Ukraine, the left versus the right and all that stuff, to have as objective opinion as I possibly can, or I'm striving for. I first have to understand that it's impossible for me to have a completely objective opinion. That I can't be totally objective. Then I have to ask myself, well, who am I to know what is the ethics? What is right and wrong? And then people will say, you can feel it in your gut. You know when something's wrong. It's like, yes, I definitely feel it in my gut. I definitely feel my emotion mixing with my intellect, bringing forth an opinion. But do I really know? So what I do is I almost pretend that I'm traveling back in time, that I'm somewhere in the year 2150, and I'm going back in time to see what it was like in 2023 and 4, and trying to view it as objectively as I possibly can. So one last part. It's almost like I don't resent emotionally Adolf Hitler. I intellectually find him to be abhorrent and awful and all these things, right? But I don't have an emotional, he did not personally affect me directly. Yet clearly his actions have affected me and the entire world. So I try to view even just the most personal resentment. A guy honks at me and yells at me, or like whatever it is. If I'm pretending that I'm a time traveler from 100 years, then I'm not as emotionally, personally offended, if that makes sense. That's
I get you on that. There's different ways to look at the facts, the intellectual side of it, the political side of it, and the aftermath of these big movements, these big political movements and disaster. One thing I just remembered watching a Rogan interview of Big John McCarthy maybe 4 years ago, and he talked about the history of the UFC and about all of the history of the UFC programs I've watched. I think this one is what I would call the one that I would believe most, because he's not being nice to anyone. He's very factual. You know about how police, a good police person writes a report, and these are the facts, ma'am, just the facts, ma'am.
Yes.
And I think that's what he did. And I think he said,
how did Hixon not get to fight in UFC 1? That was the question,
That's the
and
question.
we didn't answer it.
The question,
So
we have two questions to answer this.
Okay.
12-6 elbow. We'll go back to
that one too.
But let's go to this. Why wasn't Hixon in? Because Hixon was the champion of the family.
Oh, no doubt.
By far.
And even back then, Hoist came out in articles and said, my brother Hixon is 10 times better than me.
Always said that.
And he wasn't lying.
Yeah, he said, I will go to train tonight and my brother will tap me 100 times.
Yep. You're so good at that. But what truly happened was, again, I say, look at the first UFC for Horion. Horion looked at this entire thing. People have to understand how much time Horion had spent trying to get people to understand grappling is an art form. That taking somebody down and putting them into a place where they are unaware of what can happen to them, unknowledgeable, is a way for you to be safe in a fight, taking kinetic energy off of their plate and putting you in a place where you could do what you do. And he was trying to sell this the whole time. Then he meets Art Davie. Art Davie is the one that helps put together the Gracie in action tapes. And through that marketing scheme, Horian sees this guy can make me money. And so then he says, okay, what are you talking about with your fighting thing? And no doubt Hixon is the best one in the family, but Hixon at that time is training people out of Torrance. And then he opens up his own studio in West LA.
And Pico.
Yes. And when he opened up his studio in West LA, Horian went, whoop, you're not going to, the person that is going to be fighting in this is going to be representing my school. And that's how Hoist got it.
So that was always the rumors, that he couldn't control Hixon.
Couldn't.
Yeah. The other rumor was, there was two rumors. One, that he couldn't control Hixon, and the other one was that Hixon was like physically very impressive. And that that's
such a lie.
That's a lie.
Well,
yeah.
it's a lie.
Well, let me just fill the sentence.
Absolutely.
The sentence was that because he was physically impressive, it wouldn't be as good an advertisement for jiu-jitsu, because Hoist was like long and thin, and he wasn't like the typical. But Hixon, when you looked at him like with his shirt off, I mean, he had a six-pack and big muscles. He looked like a physically impressive guy.
But Hixon was he was 10 pounds heavier than Hoist.
Yeah.
Okay, a little bit shorter.
Yeah.
Okay, he's shorter than Hoist, but he would have worn if he would have worn the gi, what are you going to see anyways?
Right.
Nothing. Okay, looks, guy in a gi. And, that whole thing of Horian, marketing-wise, said, oh, it was because Hixon is this big guy, and I wanted it to be the small guy.
Oh, so that was Horian saying that?
Oh, yeah, Horian's the one that came out with that.
So he said that just because he needed an excuse for why he couldn't control Hixon.
I mean, that certainly is the story that some people want you to believe. But from what I understand, it's a lot more complex and a lot more involved with family rivalry, resentments, and all that. And again, that's an area that I'm not going to even touch. I often say that in a world of rising threats of thermonuclear war, AI, political unrest,
sexual dysphoria.
Yeah, like that. Who and how and what the UFC origins to me seems so unimportant.
Yeah, I should have said gender dysphoria is the actual word, not sexual dysphoria.
Yes.
I wanted to ask you, Hixon, when I met him in 2005 surfing in Ventura, I had been out of jiu-jitsu and I was working on salsa, and I introduced him to my Cuban girlfriend who was teaching me salsa, and I taught her some martial arts, etc. When I met Hixon, I told him that I was out of jiu-jitsu because my lower spine had a problem. So when I went up and did the triangle, which is a compression of the discs in one way, it was, giving me some pain, and I didn't know biomechanics then as well as I do now. So even though I was doing a lot of good hanging exercise and chin-ups and stretching, I didn't understand all the supportive structure of the kinetic chain like I do now. And I didn't know about tennis ball and foam rolling in 2005. So that's been a big part of the therapy of my life. I don't know how much Hixon knew even in 2005 about all of that type of stuff. But so he was very nice to us. We took pictures of them. It's on my LinkedIn profile. Really cool guy. And I followed him very closely before and after that. And that was 10 years after his documentary Choke, which you mentioned his time.
Yes,
in Japan.
I personally think out of all of the reality martial arts movies, Choke is my absolute favorite one of them all.
Oh, yeah.
And it really does show Hixon. Like I often say that Gracie Jiu-Jitsu without Hixon would be a myth. Hixon makes it a legend. Everything the Gracie family claimed it is Hixon represents that embodiment.
Yeah. So real quick on Hixon's health, when I told him about the spine stuff, I didn't know postural alignment like I do now. I learned heavy duty in 2009. I spent 2 years with some people on Egoscue therapy and physical therapy and other exercise therapy. So I really learned a lot about that stuff. These people were nice enough to bless me. These are like 5th degree black belts in their physical therapy type of endeavors. and they gave me all that wisdom, and I worked on it and I practiced it, and it helped me, and it helped me help others with what I do and coaching people. But Hixon, I don't know if he spent the time besides gymnastica natural and some appointments here and there. I'm a wellness oriented person, and he's a different kind of a cat than I am. So I would say I'm a wellness athlete. So I take time off if I'm injured, which not many people that I know do. A lot of people will keep pushing it. They'll take cortisone shots. They'll take other things. Some get into banned substances, this and that. So when I met him, and then later I heard from him a year ago in his interviews that he has disc problems and he's disabled. And then more recently, he said he's got Parkinson's. So if it is pugilistic Parkinson's and it's related to his combat stuff, as far as I know, he doesn't have cauliflower ears. Is that correct? When you see his ears, they're not cauliflower.
He does.
He has some.
Yeah, he does. Yeah.
Oh, he does. It's not excessive though, right?
Not too bad. I mean, there's obviously people who have far worse ears.
But you can see it in him. I didn't know that.
Yes.
So cauliflower ears, you can live with that. Compressed spine, you can live with that. Parkinson's, that's a whole different realm. So I know from Muhammad Ali and all these other people and football players where you can get that concussion stuff over and over, and then you can get Parkinson. In your opinion, can you get it from landing hard on the mat, even if your head doesn't hit, just the jarring of your cranium?
I have no idea where Parkinson's comes from, but I do know that impact fucks your head up. And being a 59-year-old aging combat athlete, jiu-jitsu is one of the last arts that I can do without getting my brain injured. Like, boxing has the shortest shelf life. I often say the old joke, I love boxing, but it doesn't love me back.
Sure.
And it's really hard on your head. Football is hard on your head. Judo, being slammed and your skull bouncing, your brain getting jostled inside. Yeah, it's hard. And the jiu-jitsu, the ground fighting aspect of it, definitely is something that you can do in your older age without fucking up your head. So do I recommend people not do these head injurious sports? That's where, I don't even really want to have an opinion. I mean, I don't want my kids playing football. Mm-hmm. I don't want them doing boxing, even though I'd love if they want to learn the art of boxing. And there are certainly ways in which we humans have learned to train and or use protective gear with various success of attempts to minimize the amount of head injury. Like American rules football, wasn't it the 70s when they introduced the face mask part, a cage, I think before, and I want to say in the 60s, the cap looked much more like the Australian rules cap, where it was more of a leather kind of helmet, soft helmet, and equipment changes the game. And so suddenly you're wearing this helmet to protect your head, which means you're really just ramming each other harder in the head than you would. So boxing gloves changed boxing. And I often say one of the greatest changes for martial arts was the post-World War II neoprene rubber and inventing padding that we could suddenly, it changed how wrestling was done. It changed how jiu-jitsu was done. And so, I don't know. I mean,
so if you mentioned Michelangelo, and he talks about the times that Hixon was training him privately, giving him all the secrets that he needed. Maybe they're a difference in age by 4 or 5 years. I can't remember, but Higin's this big dude, and they
about
had
10 years.
10 years. And
Yeah.
so they had to do a competition one time. I'm guessing it was back in the 80s in Brazil, and Hixon's his coach, and Hixon says to him, he said, "I don't want to do this," and Hixon said, "No, we got to do this. It's for the event." And he said, "We got to go all out." And so they went all out, and he says he slammed Hixon pretty damn hard, and he's a big dude. His real weight, if he was fit, would be what, 210 or 220, something like that.
Something like that. Yeah. That was a fight that I know Hixon did not want to do. And I want to say it was Haleo that wanted that fight to happen. But again, this is getting into the family politics, and everybody has their own version. Everybody has their own opinion, and I wasn't there. So
yeah. What I'm trying to ask you about is, did Hixon do sparring with gloves or with anything where he's getting hit in the head over his normal 40-year career? Did he do any of that?
Sure. But I mean, all Vale Tudo or mixed martial artists are experiencing trauma to their head repeatedly over a career.
So during his training, or mostly in his competitions?
Both.
I didn't know he trained with getting hit in the head. I didn't know he trained in that way.
It's impossible to not get hit. Like, the fact is, true martial arts against relatively the same skilled guys, you are exchanging things meant to hurt each other, right? And you can minimize it in sparring, which is what we all do, but you're going to get hit in the head. Well, like, I remember there was a period of time shortly before I found Haueter's garage where I was boxing, and I was getting pretty good. I was in that stage, what I call the advanced amateur, the purple belt phase, where in some ways I'm really good, and in some ways I'm not as good as I think. And I was at an LA gym, and I sparred a pro from Mexico, and the third round, he just about took my head off, and I realized the mercy that he had done with me in rounds 1 and 2. And it was one of those things where it just clicked, where not only am I not as good as I think I am, but I am pretty good. But I'm good enough to read that this guy is holding back. He's a pro. And I'm not a pro boxer. Like, I'm okay. And what a coach back then said that my jab is a professional level jab. Like, I have a great fucking jab. And I have pretty good in and out movement, but I don't have the rear hand skill, and I didn't have that ability to roll punches well. And that's like an art that you almost have to learn the hard way. And I realized that I don't want to learn this because it'll be hard. It's something that, like, again, I love the art of boxing, but it doesn't love me back. And I remember I got hit in that sparring session so hard that I remember for a week I was having a hard time reading. My eyes would like jump from the lines in the book, and I just thought, this is dumb. That my dad was right when he said that it's something that you do if you have to do it. You don't do it because you want to. But boxing is one of those combat sports where the people who are involved in it tend to come out of the lower education rungs. It's a way off the streets in the ghetto. It's the pinnacle of the honor culture dueling. And if you don't have to, don't fucking do it.
Yeah.
Now, interesting to go back to honor cultures and dueling. There was a period in early American history, I want to say the early 1800s, where it was actually the upper class and educated that dueled all the time.
Fancy pistols, not the regular people didn't have fancy pistols.
Yeah, but even like, fisticuffs, like it was very common that the aristocrats would settle things with a duel. And when I think of the Brazilian Valley Tudo culture, it very much reminds me of that early 1800s American culture. And European too. Like the catch wrestling comes from England, but at a certain point in time, England banned it because it's dueling and was trying to get rid of the dueling culture. And like I say, obviously I'm entrenched in this. I have a love-hate relationship with dueling.
Yeah.
Because I don't think it's good for our society as a whole. But at the same time, I don't think we're ever going to completely remove it until we genetically change, because it's within our biology.
Yeah.
So I think of myself as an historian, an observer, a journalist, and the height of journalism is that of the scientific method. Is I want to view things as objectively as I possibly can and be constantly aware of my emotional attachment to various aspects, which leads to my ethics.
Yeah.
In it.
Start talking about this whole modern argument of greatest of all time and who brought what and this type of thing. And
Hixon is the greatest of all time. I mean, in my opinion, Hixon is the legend of the jiu-jitsu embodiment of MMA. Yes.
And so when people look at his story and his intentions, I'm trying to grasp, and I think I have a good read on him and what he's good at, because the things that I think I'm good at, I don't feel the need to go out and prove myself in a monetary way or in a fame way. I'm just happy that I was able to accomplish something and do something with it. And I may want to do something related to it or separated from it completely. And I think Muhammad Ali got that in 1967 when he decided not to go on the draft. He'd already proved himself. He'd already worked 5 or 6 hours a day or more on his art. And when he went to Florida to train with Angelo Dundee, they said he was not interested in women. He did not do any drinking. He went to the gym and he went back and stayed in a really cheap hotel near the gym, Angelo Dundee's gym in Miami.
Yeah.
And he did his thing and he knew what he had. And he got into Muslim, he got into politics, he got into saving different things and different callings. And I think Hixon has a part of that in him, where when somewhere between the ages of 17 and 23, he did his thing. He knew what he could accomplish. He knew what life was about. He wanted to be a certain way, and he's a quiet guy in certain ways. He's a very good looking guy, and he had to solve some problems, but he told me, I said, tell me about your dad. When I met him in 2005, he said, my dad is a very hard man. And a lot of people have had that to overcome that obstacle. He didn't need to go out and fight 500 fights or whatever his dad fought and challenge all these big lugs from all over the planet and Muhammad Ali and all these people. He was happy kind of being Hixon and being like you and I talked about, that 15-year-old kid who wanted to discover things. Is that something that's somewhat in the realm of an accurate read according to what you think about him?
Yeah, I mean, that sounds fairly accurate. Peter McGuire, who helped Hixon write his recent book, Breathe, captured Hixon's warrior journey very well in body, mind, and spirit. And Hixon has adapted and changed with age. But jiu-jitsu is the art of adaptation. And one of the things I get from my current training with Hixon, as I'm an aging athlete.
And he can still train with you even with his spine issues?
I mean, he's pretty wrecked up a lot of the times, but yeah, we'll do reality-based positional training, and I'm learning things. And the thing about Hixon is he's still learning. He's still working on perfecting the art of jiu-jitsu and keeping a mind, body, spirit balance. And that, what more can you ask in life?
No, that's a great place to end it. Sifu Chris, I'm blessed that we had this time to share. You go do your next thing. Thanks to Melissa for arranging this, and I'll send her an email to see if you're available sometime in a month or two, and we could tap into some of those things that are considered politically questionably correct that we could talk about.
Oh boy, there's a minefield of controversial topics out there, and like everything, I certainly have my opinions.
Thanks, brother. Awesome. We'll
All
talk
right.
to you soon.
I'll see you, Sifu Slim.